In May of 2025, my 14-year-old found what remains of a tree that he used to hang out in when he was 5, like in 2016, and this inspired me to make a video. I only have photos from 2016 because that's when I started taking my son out here, but I'd been hanging out there since the 90s and seen a lot of changes. So the northern tip, or the tail of Coon Key, used to be a camping hangout, and it was higher ground even prior to 2016. Really, before 2010 and in the 90s, it was much higher than it was when I started taking my son there. But it was a great place to introduce my son to the 10,000 Islands. By 2017, he already had a lot of really good memories, and he just loved this one tree. He'd climb in it and pretend he was a monkey, and that was one of his favorite spots. Although the higher tides were chipping away at it, Hurricane Irma had a huge impact. Got a break from hurricane recovery in New Year's 2018 and got out to Coon Key. Then in springtime, best time to be out on the islands in my opinion, got my son out there around his birthday in April. And this was his first time coming back to Coon Key since Hurricane Irma. And he was pretty excited to get back to the spot. And Irma pretty much took probably at least a foot of shell and sand off the back tail, which is telling because usually the back sides of these islands are building up with shell, and there he is in his tree where he spent so much time. It was cool to see him find his tree. He was a little sad with the changes, but he still was having fun, and he had already seen a lot of changes inland as we were dealing with hurricane recovery, so it was a good education in nature. Although it was Irma had the biggest impact that I've seen out there since the 90s, it's important to remember that that area was much higher prior to that, especially before 2010. And the other side of the island, of course, there was a house, and there was a fish camp, and that had already been eroded away. So these changes have been ongoing for quite a while. But Irma changed the entire island most significantly, much more than any of the other storms thus far. So here's this tree pre-Irma. This is our hangout spot. This is where we would catch fish and mullet. And you can see the shell is fine. And then in 2018, post-Irma, it's way reduced. Irma was worse, but Ian and the other storms following it impacted Coon Key greatly. It just never really recovered. In May 2025, when we were hanging out, Caden went over to the tree that he used to hang out in. Like all the outer islands and the 10,000 Islands, it was much bigger in 1940 and higher ground. Tides were lower, and there was actually a structure on Fish Camp on Coon Key. The remains were obvious when I first went out there, and the high ground with the coconut palms and the trees they were doing well, but there was actually a drop off where it was already eroding back then. But as the tides got higher, even in the time between Wilma and Irma when there was no storms, the erosion was happening. In 2010 the tides jumped up quite a bit, and really things started happening. So notice these points of invasive exotics. They're in the water now. I'm glad that we have at least those data. Wilma, Irma, and the other storms had a huge impact, but notice the tides have been going up, especially since 2010. And remember, 2016 is when I started having pictures. The rate of sea level rise had increased quite a bit post 2010, and the low tides have been much higher since then. These islands were actually growing over the last 3,000 years as the 10,000 Islands formed and as the Calusa built shell mounds, the archaic people. The rate of sea level rise is too high now for mounds to be formed.